Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Raw and Unfiltered. This time I'm going to be doing a brief overview on my thoughts on Buddy Again Volume 2, Super Buddy Wars EX. Man, that's a mouthful. But anyway, the set was originally supposed to be released in April, and unfortunately due to the coronavirus, it and as a result all of the subsequent sets after it have been delayed to God knows when, but Super Buddy Wars is doing some really interesting things that I think are both very good and very bad for the game. So the set supports a couple of new decks and a couple of old decks. So it supports Dragon Ein, Dragon Zwei, it supports Fifth Omnis, Thunder Empire, Sun Dragons, then it supports the new decks, which is Super Machines and Super Warriors. And those are some really good decks right out of the bat. But what those two decks are doing is it basically is doing a whole bunch of 1 to 2 card updates for a lot of older decks that can utilize some of the new cards. So as an example, there's a new card burn card that can go into a card burn deck. There is a new Masked Vantage and Blazer Frill that can go into the Superheroine deck, and so on and so forth. So I really like the concept of Super Machines and Super Warriors. Now, out of the two decks, I feel like Super Warriors is definitely the runaway deck and is probably going to be the best deck of the set, by far. Because what it does fundamentally kind of just breaks the game, because a lot of defensive cards and a lot of defensive reactions take place during the combat step, where Super Warriors, being a impact-based deck, does everything in the final phase. So it just kind of breaks the game a little bit. Yes, impact monsters were a thing way back when in Triple D, but the fact that they are to the ace level power is very, very scary. On top of which, the fact that they just naturally turn off half the defensive options in the game is also, again, very, very scary. And that's what's really making them really good. On top of which, they reprinted one card, which is the Hero World Spell Null, and I feel like it's a very, very good reprint, but it's a reprint I kind of saw coming because of how Bushiroad has been treating spell nullification reprints lately. I'll get into that in a completely separate video eventually. So, Hero World is doing some really good things. I really like what Hero World is doing. As far as Dragon World, it's doing some things that I don't necessarily agree with, where they are just raw updating decks, and if you basically don't have any of these decks already, then all of these cards are basically pointless and meaningless. And because these are legacy decks that they're updating, some of the cards can be very hard to find or very expensive, so being able to build it and play it isn't necessarily a realistic thing for a lot of players. So Sun Dragons, as like an example, can be very, very expensive. It requires a lot of pieces from a lot of different sets, so finding them all can be very difficult, even though they do get some new powerful cards to play with. It's just, can people actually play with the new cards? Probably not. Only a select few who already have it. And that kind of extends towards all of them. Thunder Empires is the same thing. It does a lot of good for Thunder Empires, but if you already don't have a Thunder Empire deck, well, you can't build one here. So, yeah, I really don't like that about the deck. And that extends to all of the Gaian stuff, too. So his Dragon Ein and Dragon Zwei cards. So the new Azidahaka is borderline unplayable for a lot of players who don't have his respective deck. And the same thing with, like, the new Kyoya. So it's just a very unfortunate thing that they do something so right here, but do something so wrong here. But the support that they are getting, don't get me wrong, is very good for their respective decks and can even extend into some other decks depending on the support. So I was recently toying around with Fifth Omni stuff and realized, oh, a lot of this just says Armor Dragons and Dragon. So any deck that uses Armor Dragons can utilize some of these cards, and lo and behold, Purgatory Knights is like another deck that can go into Dragon World, and all of these cards, or a lot of these cards, could be splashed into Purgatory Knights. So that's kind of interesting. It doesn't necessarily help you as a player build the deck, but it's just giving more tools if you already have access to those tools. And then they have 2 new cards that can go into a lot of decks. The first one is Grace of the Sun Deity, which this card is bonkers. This card is nuts. If you don't have multiple playsets of this card, you should probably get multiple playsets of this card. This card fundamentally changes how Buddy Fight is played as a whole because of what it does. First of all, it's free. It doesn't have any cast cost associated to it. You just, at counter speed, choose one of the 2. The first effect is it stops burn damage. So that's already pretty big because attacking is becoming harder to do. So finding alternate ways to win the game generally is becoming more of a favored strategy. So burn damage, milling, just other alternate ways of winning the game, making sure your opponent has no resources. Like, it's just very good, and this card just helps turn off a good portion of those strategies by taking away the burn and chip aspect of it. And then its other ability is basically a card on your field. It just can't leave the field. So all of the new effects of just being dropped and sent straight to the drop zone or putting it back into the bottom of the deck, those are now all kind of rendered mute because of this card as a whole, and it really hurts any decks trying to employ those strategies, which the main ones were Lost World and Time Dragons. So while it hurts those decks, it also hurts everything else because it prevents what you're trying to destroy or get rid of from being gotten rid of. So I just personally think this card is a little overboard, and it's definitely going to change the way Buddy Fight is played. Now, a card that isn't going to change the way Buddy Fight is played is Buddy Grandis. So this is just a good new search tool that Hero World, Dragon World, Dragon Ein, and Dragon's Y have access to, which is really good because sometimes those decks really need the extra support, and seeing them being able to get like a more generic support is pretty good. This is probably just going to be a 1 or 2 of in most decks that would or could run this. So it's not over the toply powerful, but it's still a very good tool nonetheless. So as a whole, I think Buddy Again Volume 2 is doing some really good things. It's doing some really bad things. And God, I really wish this card didn't exist. So feel free to tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, feel free to like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.